want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
We are the Madmen of Masculinity.
Your home for healthy masculinity. We're just real men having real conversations for you.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kirk M. Samuels.
And I am Jason B. Kendrick.
And we are the Madmen of Masculinity, baby.
That's right. Just real men having real conversations for you. And yeah, once again, we're going deep, baby.
That's right.
That's what she said. We're going deep. We're taking this off the deep end.
We're going deep with that thing, man. No doubt. Hey, man, I you know, kind of besides being a profound voice on masculine radio, I work with a lot of guys, man. I work with a lot of guys that have one thing in common, and that one thing in common commonly is addiction. And you know, and it's something that you know, is one of those things that we don't like to talk about, but it's everywhere, you know. And so you know, it's a common thing amongst a lot of people, male and female, but definitely amongst a lot of guys, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things I think it needs to be talked about to take the stigma off a little bit. And nowadays, whether people want to admit it or not, pretty much everybody's addicted to something. And of course, the big three usually get, you know, the all the top billing. It's, you know, alcohol, drugs, sex, porn, whatever it is. But pretty much everybody nowadays is addicted to their phone. Maybe they're addicted to work. Maybe they're addicted to Netflix. They're addicted to something. And you know, use the Eckhart Tolle quote: "All addiction comes from pain, or all pain causes addiction, and all addiction causes pain." So you get this vicious cycle of trying to cover up your pain with addiction, which causes more addiction. And was listening to Tony Robbins today, and it was the only way to change that addiction is to replace it with a new habit. So I don't want to say a healthy addiction, but at least a healthier habit is the only way to change that addiction. And you need support. You need help because there's too many of us out there attempting to white knuckle it and go through this thing alone and going, I'm fine. I may be a functioning alcoholic and I drink, you know, 6-pack a night and still make it to work. I'm fine, but that's not healthy living, man.
Yeah, and it's part of my personal journey through addiction, and in my case, it's probably the least publicly talked about, but yet probably the most, I would say, one of the most common addictions, and I'll tell you why. But and that is internet pornography, or just pornography in general. But today it'll be on the internet, if that's going to be how you consume it. And the reason I say it's probably one of the most prolific. One of the most prolific is because I also, you know, work with people who and you know, I'm part of a community of men that struggle with drugs and alcohol. And normally, if you have a struggle with drugs and alcohol, then you know, an online addiction comes right along with that. It's pretty much like standard issue, and so and not necessarily in reverse. And you know, and again, you know, in my case, you know, online addiction, you know, this this is the drug, you know, and it's or that, at least that's where you consume the drug, and it's free and everywhere, free and unlimited everywhere. We probably have a huge problem with that, and we do have a problem with alcoholism. But there's no other drug that's free and unlimited everywhere. But either way, that's one aspect of it. And to your point, you know, an addiction is consumption of something to the point of being a habit. Um, when you a lot of things are a habit. When you do something consistently and you do something, you know, deeply and all those kind of things, it becomes something that's ingrained in you, and it does become a habit. And so you can have a habit of losing, which is the addiction, or you can have a habit of winning, which is, I wouldn't necessarily say in my case it's replacing it with something, but it's definitely putting another habit, another set of habits in that space in your life in terms of focusing on what you want and not what you don't want.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that most of us have some sort of addiction, and whether we're aware of it or not, is because we're covering up some pain, we're medicating some pain, there's something we're not looking at. And a lot of times, especially for us guys, it comes from that, little boy wound of not good enough, afraid they're not lovable. Some of us have the multitude, we have them all, don't think we're good enough, don't think we're lovable, don't think we're capable, don't think we can do it, whatever it is. And so we tend to medicate these things with whatever is easiest. And sometimes, like you said, they come in a package. So you may start out with alcohol because that's acceptable. Everybody, oh, I'm tired. I'm after work. I'm gonna have a beer. Well, one is too many, and 10 ain't enough a lot of times for us. And you have that one beer turns into six, turns into 10, and then after you've had a few, you're like, oh, let me get on online, because now my inhibitions are gone. So now I have nothing to lose, or less to lose, I think. And so let me get online and medicate some more. And then, oh well, if the photography is not enough, let me get on Netflix, or let me get on Amazon. Let me do some shopping. Let me do some, retail therapy. And all of these things start to tie in together. And, speaking from experience, that's how it tends to go. It's like, and it's so subversive because when it becomes a habit, you don't even think about it. It's like you're being puppeteered. You just doing the same thing every day. So you get off work, you go home, you go to the fridge, you grab a drink, you go sit on the patio or whatever. And then a few drinks later, you're like, oh, I'm relaxed now. I'm feeling pretty good. Oh, well, let me go over here. Now let's add on to this addiction sandwich. Okay, let's add another layer. And then you wake up in the morning once again going, oh, I'm so disappointed in myself because I said in the morning I'm not going to do it again. And that's how it's really a habit. It's really an addiction because you can consciously say, oh, I don't want to do that. But then because of the habitual nature and how everything, your body basically takes over, it says, well, this is what we do. And that's why having support and doing things like personal development, maybe get it into a Tony Robbins seminar or Joe Dispenza seminar, and because you basically have to create new neural pathways, you have to rewire your brain, and that's very, very difficult to do on your own unless there's some sort of huge trauma. I mean, if you've hit rock bottom and you're like, I can't take it anymore, maybe that's enough of leverage to get you moving. But in most cases, most of us will need some support and somebody else to understand what we're going through.
Yeah, and when in terms of the definition of addiction, what is an addiction? Consumption is different than addiction. Um, and I tend to follow kind of methodology in terms of the definition of addiction of this guy, Dr. Gabor Mate, who's a Canadian psychologist and a medical doctor. And he has a four-part definition. And one is the craving for something. Two is the seeking relief for that craving by, temporary relief for that craving by the consumption of that thing. Three is the inability to stop seeking relief for that craving by consuming that thing. And four is negative consequences associated with finding relief for that craving. And so, I like to paint the picture. I love animal crackers and Nutella a lot, right? I mean, if you never had animal crackers and Nutella, you need to figure out what's wrong with your life because you are missing out something. So I crave it. And I satisfy that craving by eating animal crackers and Nutella on occasion. Now, do I have the inability to stop eating animal crackers and Nutella? No, as a matter of fact, I haven't had animal crackers and Nutella in a long time because for some reason I go get them big old tubs of Nutella from Costco that come 2 in a pack. And when I open one, then I don't have it for a few weeks. Next time I go, the Nutella is like rock hard, whatever. A whole nother Oprah. But anyhow, and I don't have negative consequences associated with eating animal crackers and Nutella. So I don't fall into that 4-part kind of definition of animal crackers and Nutella. There have been other things in my life. Absolutely did I crave it. Absolutely did I consume it. Absolutely could I not stop. And absolutely did it have negative consequences. I got 2 marriages gone. I lost a career. And at the end of my rope, I was ready to end my life off of, something virtual. Right. And so, yeah, that definition of addiction, everybody's got to check their self. What is that definition of addiction? And, I've also heard the methodology that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Because addiction in itself, normally leads you to a place of loneliness and isolation. And so when you find connection, that's definitely the ripe garden to grow some sense of sobriety or even freedom from that addiction.
Yeah, and I mean that's something I can speak on. I mean personally, because the way I grew up, I've always had that kind of thought that I was on my own, because I, from a young age, was kind of taking care of myself. There wasn't a lot of emotional intimacy between my parents and I. They took care of my physical needs, my financial needs, and that was pretty much it. And so I just kind of developed this methodology or this coping mechanism of, all right, well, as long as I'm on my own, I can take care of myself, but then it doesn't really lead to a lot of good connection. And so there's always been different coping mechanisms, and alcohol and pornography and things like that have always played a big role because those stimulate a lot of dopamine, and they definitely, like the alcohol lowers the inhibitions and then, makes you feel relaxed and good. And then you stimulate the dopamine with the pornography or whatever else. And it's just becomes this kind of capricious, just thing that happens that you're so used to it because without somebody there. And that's one of the things I've noticed is in most of my life, even in my troubled relationships, because most of my relationships are troubled because I my picker was broken for many years. And even in those relationships, I was much healthier because, to your point, there was that connection. There was somebody else at home. So this isolation that I keep speaking about for us guys is something that's kind of slowly killing us because it's really hard not to fall to an addiction or to allow the addiction to continue when there's nobody around. Because a lot of times I know for me, I had to come to the realization that I was doing these things because I was lonely or because I was alone, not because I was addicted to this substance or this thing. It was because I'm coming home to a house by myself. And so having that connection and creating that connection, sometimes that's really hard, especially when you're a guy and you're in your middle years and you go to work all day and you're not sure where to go to connect. And online connection is supportive, but it's not quite the same as physical connection. So you're like, I don't know what to do. Any connection, especially when it comes to helping to support you away from an addiction or to at least lessen that addiction and the impact on your life, is beneficial because getting just some more input, whether it's virtual, whether it's physical, I mean, whether you can get a men's group or a meeting or whatever might work for you. And I know a lot of us, when it comes to having to actually address the addiction, it's really scary to go, oh, well, I'm not as bad as that guy. So why do I need to go to a 12-step meeting? Why do you need to go to AA or NA or SA or whatever these meetings are? And then you judge yourself. But those have a winning track record. So sometimes you got to get over yourself and go, what's more important? And for a lot of us, I mean, we get to that point where it's like almost have to get to that point of it's more painful to stay than to change. And we're trying to get you to not have to get to that point, but sometimes that's what it takes. You got to get to that point. You go, all right, I'm in so much pain now. Either I need to get help or take myself out. And I would much rather you guys get help because there's many avenues out there and there's nothing wrong with. And actually, there's a lot of strength and courage in getting help.
Now, there's a difference, and this should be pointed out. There's a difference. You can be lonely without being alone.
Yeah.
They're two totally different things. I, on the other hand, unlike your story, I came home to a wife and kids every day, and I was still lonely because we didn't have connection. And then on top of that, my addiction kept me, in my office in the house for hours on end. Up till, I mean, 4 or 5 hours a night, up till whatever o'clock in the morning, all that kind of stuff. And so, it's not even, it's not even limited to somebody not having somebody at home when they come home. But either way, it still leads to a lack of, or it still involves a lack of connection, and it still involves a lack of community. And so when you have community and connection, then I think you're in the best place anyway to do the other thing that you need to do, which is take some kind of action. You need to do something different if you want to have something different. You're not going to create positive habits without doing positive stuff, right? I mean, you don't get negative habits. You don't get addicted to something without doing something, right? So you're not going to get, freedom from that thing without doing something. And so you got to have connection, ideally in the community, but then you also have to do something. And having some kind of strategy for creating the positive habits and the positive feedback loops in your life are critically important.
Yeah, I mean, something to think about too when you're wanting to make change or you feel like you're making a change. I mean, one of the things Tony Robbins talks about quite a bit is like you need to have leverage. And is got to get to a point where you decide, okay, I need to make a decision, and not like these him holly should decisions that we normally make. Of like, yeah, maybe I'll do that. Like, no, you need to make that like life altering decision. Like, this is a must. I must change, and then have somebody to support you. And there's different ways to start those changes. I know for me, starting testosterone replacement therapy really helped because it started to get that energy back. And then that started to lift my mood. And then it started kind of getting me more focused into, okay, what am I filling my head with? What is it that, is it TikTok and Netflix, or maybe I should listen to something that's uplifting and positive so I'm not in this downward spiral or this nothing spiral. Because so many of us end up in this middle ground where it's not so bad, but I'm not really happy. And so you're just kind of numb. And at some point, you got to decide for yourself as a man and go, all right, is this what I really want? What do I want to create in my life? And it's not easy. That's why having support and having a community is such a good idea, because you're much more likely to succeed with support. I mean, the old saying is you can go fast alone, but you can go far together. And this is something that you want to go far with. You want to have support. Plus, once you realize, once again, we keep talking about it, when you get in a connection, community, men's group, into whatever kind of service or tool you decide to use to get out of this or to reprogram your mind, finding out you're not alone and other people have done this and gone through this and can relate to you will make it that much easier. When you're trying to white knuckle it and do it on your own, that's where a lot of those step backs, those fallbacks, those relapses happen, because you don't have any support. You're kind of a on a unicycle. You got one wheel and no kickstand. You're just gonna wobble unless you keep the momentum up. And it's really hard to keep all that momentum up without some support. So having support around you, having guys around you who are aware and doing similar things will get you much further in the long run.
Right. And then, at the same time, unfortunately, and I hate to see it when it happens, but unfortunately, and I was one of those cases, sometimes guys need to hit rock bottom. Um, and I don't think hitting rock bottom is necessarily a bad thing for everybody. I think sometimes, when you hit rock bottom, that can be the foundation to build your house on. When you get to the end of the rope, that can be the beginning of your fuse. And so, man, I think unfortunately, like I said, I get a lot of phone calls. I have a lot of one-time conversations with guys. And I can listen to a guy in a minute or two and tell if he's ready or not. And if he ain't ready, then I don't even waste my time, because it is just a waste of my time to even work with a guy. And so sometimes you do have to hit that rock bottom. And then when you do get to that place and backed up into a corner, then it's like, okay, I got to do something. For me, it was sleeping in the back of my car, and then getting to the point where I began to rationalize and it made sense that my life wasn't really worth living, and then it became a fight for my life in a different kind of way. And so all those things, I mean, all those things are hugely important. And for me, it also included a huge leap of faith, or a huge investment in my faith, and an importance in my faith. I work a lot with Step 7 Ministries. I work a lot with guys that really lean on that part of us. I believe we're holistic beings. I believe we're a mind, we're a body, and we also are a spirit. And you can be dead in any one of those areas and still be alive. And so I think that intangible aspect of who we are is important, and we can't ignore that in terms of our overall holistic health. But all of those things factor into the journey to freedom from those things. And at the same time, you do at some point have to get to the point where you address the pain, because addiction is medication, and you don't find a medication where there's not pain, at least in our culture. So you gotta eventually get to the point where you gotta confront that dragon. You gotta go back to that little boy and find out where he was hurting and why, and who hurt him, and deal with that. We talked about forgiveness and all that kind of stuff, and man, I had to go back to all those places and deal with all that. And then it's a journey, it's not a destination. Freedom from addiction is no finish line until you're gone. And until then, it's just a constant journey of learning and discovery and taking things to the next level. But it's never one of those things that's just going to go away once you get to some finish line.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up faith and the spiritual side, because for me, one of the things that really I had one of those dark nights of the soul, and like it was just all coming down on me, like when that you have that weight, and you're just like, I don't know what to do with this pain. I don't know what to do with all this. And it just kind of, I don't, my guardian angel, my spirit guides, God, whoever, whatever your rationale is, but we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And I basically said, you take this. I don't know what to do with this. You take this pain. And as soon as I said that, it was like a weight was lifted. And all of a sudden I felt lighter. I felt like I had a place for this. And it's something that we as men really need to look at our spiritual side. We need to look at that there's something bigger than us. We didn't create ourselves, something created us. Whatever your rationale, whatever you want to call it, whether it's source, universe, God, whatever, there is something out there, and we need to have a relationship with that, especially when we want to change our lives in a huge way and get out from behind an addiction, or do something in a more healthy way, because it's now become a practice of mine. When I feel that pain build up, when I feel that weight, is to, I'm giving that to spirit. I'm giving that away. That's not mine. I don't know what to do with it. Obviously, I don't know what to do with it. I've been carried around for 40 years and it's just getting heavier. So I give that away. And this is something that will help you along your way, help you along that journey, to have these little tools of like, as it builds up, because for most of us guys, it builds up. We just stuff it down and we don't know what to do with it. We don't have a healthy coping mechanism. We don't have a healthy system of coping or releasing that, letting the steam off. And until we get that, or until we have a good practice and a good strategy of releasing that steam, or releasing that pain, or even talking about it, so many of us guys don't even talk about it because we're just so used to having to suck it up and go, oh, nobody cares, so I'm just going to suck it up. And then it just slowly compresses us and kills us because there's no way in our minds to release it. And so having some sort of strategy of giving it to spirit, or having therapy or counseling, there's got to be some way that you can talk this out, talk to somebody to release that pressure, because if you don't, it will kill you. It's like being at the bottom of the ocean. The deeper you get, the greater that pressure, and then at some point it's just going to implode.
Yeah, you've got to confront these things, especially us as guys, man. We got to get out of the superhero lone ranger kind of thing. I do it myself. We got to get to the point of actually doing something about that thing, which quite honestly, often involves, something or someone else outside of us. And I think that's something we lose track on now. Even in a faith or spiritual uh, aspect of things, at some point you still got to do something. Like, when you're done praying and meditating, and when you're done all that kind of stuff, you still got to get up and you still got to do something. You still got to address, you still got to address the issue. And then, like I said, at some point you still got to address the pain, and pain is different than hurt. You can be, there's a hurt, but then there's the ongoing pain. It's like the famous football adage: "Are you injured or are you hurt?" And it's like there's two totally different things. I saw this great video with Jason Williams, and he was talking about the difference between rest and sleep. And it's like, sleep is subconscious, and rest is conscious. And so, from a hurt and pain perspective, yeah, I mean, hurt is what happened, and pain is like the thing that continues on after the thing that happened. And so we have to address what it is that is underneath the surface, that is ongoing, in terms of the ongoing thing that we're trying to constantly medicate. And like I said, I think a great way to do that is to address it, to bring it to talk to somebody about it. First of all, to bring it up, stop hiding in the thing, bring it up, bring it to somebody close to you, a group of people, deal with it. But then do something about it. I mean, we're, especially as men, we're action people. So we got to do some stuff if we want some stuff. And that includes freedom from addiction.
Yeah, you got to make that decision and then create a strategy. And that strategy needs to be multi-layered, not just having a spiritual outlet, and having a physical outlet, having a mental outlet, having a connection outlet. You wouldn't want to have the strategy so that you have a multi-layered kind of attack. It's just like any battle plan or any game plan. You want to have the offense, you want to have the defense, you want to have the special teams. You got to have all of those things. And so, starting from where you are, pick one, but you want to build, especially if you want to have a successful healing process. You want to have all of those areas covered. And so having that faith-based spiritual practice, having physical practice, having a connection, having counseling, a community. The more you have, the less each of those things has to lift, the lighter but of course it's kind of the same, like the analogy, would you rather have 100% of one person's effort or 1% of 100 people's effort? So the more outlets you have, the more support you have, the more likely you are to succeed, the more likely you are to get to that goal and get to that outcome that you want. Because the outcome for all of us is we want to have our needs met. We want to feel like some certainty. We want to feel like we have some sort of status. We want to feel some connection. We want to feel all of these things. And most of the time, when it comes to addiction that we're using to medicate pain, it's because one of those needs are met. Now, a lot of us as human beings, our needs are kind of contradictory. The first two needs are certainty and uncertainty. Once you have enough certainty and you feel safe, now you want some uncertainty. So there's some variety. So, I mean, having multiple aspects covered so that that as a human being, we're kind of this paradoxical beings. We're this eternal spiritual being in this finite physical body with that only lives so long, but we have an ego, but we also are connected to source, and all these different things have aspects that we at some point need to address. And especially when you're addressing your pain, going back to whatever that trauma was that caused you to kind of go on this spiral, you're going to need as many aspects as you can. And the more you have, the more complete and kind of multifaceted your healing can be.
hmm You know, I think I think a great example of this I witnessed just in the past 24 hours. I have someone I consider myself pretty close to. Great man, great. I mean, a spirit, one of the biggest spiritual giants I know. Um, you know, pastor here in Parker. Former NFL athlete, former, college football, whatever. I sat with him. He's in hospice right now. And I sat with him for a little bit last night. And, after like he thanked me for coming, of course, which is whatever. But I sat down next to him and, first thing he said to me was, man, I need help. The first thing he said was, I need help. Different context, but kind of the same metaphor. He's like, I need help, man. And he said, pray for me, pray with me. And so while I was there for the probably 30, 45 minutes that I was there, I mean, we prayed like several times, man. I mean, like I said, this guy is a spirit. He probably literally has the Bible memorized. Not even just the Bible memorized. A lot of people can, but I mean, he was that kind of a spiritual giant. Me and his wife was there, and me and her and the nurse, we prayed several times for him. And then at the same time, the nurse went to get him his dose of Dilaudid, because he was in like tremendous pain. Like he kept saying over and over again, everything hurts. Like it was, I mean, it was tough. So in that moment, there was the physical, well, there was the spiritual need that he had for the relief of the pain, but then there's also the literal physical relief that he had, or that he needed or received from the pain as well. And I think some of that was probably just the comfort of not being there by himself as well. And so it was a tough thing to be a part, there. But in terms of having a front row seat at that scene, but at the same time, it's kind of I see a lot of parallels in that and what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that tends to happen, I know I've dealt with this, and I think we all deal with it, is like a lot of times our perspective gets so skewed, it gets so small, we get so isolated and condensed with our perspective, we can't see the forest for the trees. And that's why I think a lot of times when guys kind of get in that downward spiral of addiction and that narrowing of perspective, they don't see any way out. But that's why I talk so much about, if you're struggling, if you're not sure what to do, give what you want to receive. And sometimes doing something like that, you want to talk about a perspective shift. Go sit with somebody in hospice. Go sit with some of the old vets at the VA. These guys who, they've had to do a lot of mental work because they're on the way out. They already know they're on the way out, and they will usually have a completely different mindset, a completely different perspective. And it could shift your life. It could change your life just by sitting with them and giving them that kind of mental relief. You give them the spiritual support, the mental support, the physical support. And sometimes just sitting there, you don't even have to know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Sometimes just sitting there, allowing another man to just express and just talk and, go in there and say, tell me about yourself. I mean, we talked about this on the last episode, the Father's Day episode. Why don't you ask the men in your life about themselves? Because most of us have never been asked that question, or very rarely, and rarely had an audience willing to listen so that we could actually talk and just get it out. And this is something we want to make a more of a positive impact, and something that's more common is that men talking. And we say talk to other men because other men will normally get it. But even talking to, your wife, your family members, just having the opportunity to express and get it out, that's part of that community. It's part of that connection. It's part of that mental health. So if you're lacking in one of those areas, you're going to try to medicate that area with binge watching TV or alcohol or pornography or whatever, because there's something out of balance where this we have all four tires that we need to look at. And so if one of those is out of balance, if you just focus on something else, that is not getting fixed. So we want to have that multifaceted spiritual, mental, physical, financial, emotional, whatever talk with ourselves and with our families and with our community, so we can create a plan and strategy to help us out of these addictions and out of these pain coping mechanisms that are not serving us but are actually killing us. And there are several ways of doing it. We're not the experts, but we can definitely help you because both of us have been through it. We both coach, we both do those things. But there's communities and there's books and there's so many things out there. So if you're ready to make a change, if you're ready to make a shift, let us help you, or let us point you in the direction of somebody else who can help you, because it's just a decision away. All you gotta do is say, hey, even if you don't think you're that addicted to anything, or you don't, I'm not a junkie on the sidewalk. Well, just because you are functional and you go to work every day, but you're still not happy, that may be just a good enough reason right there. I'm not happy or I'm not fulfilled. I need some support.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, bringing my plane in for a landing anyway, I think, again, this is something I've dealt with. This is something that I work front row, hand to hand with other men to help them find the freedom in their life. And so I see it, at the front row. And it's one of those things that, when you accept the fact that you have an addiction, and then you bring yourself to the place where you can talk about that and deal with that and bring that up with other people, and then you do something about that. You actually take action to change those habits, and then finally, address that pain that's dealing with that whole thing that you're trying to medicate. To me, that's kind of part of the cycle of getting to freedom through that whole journey. So
Yeah, I mean, and one of the reasons we wanted to do pain and addiction today was because sometimes we only focus on the chemical addictions. We only focus on those, the drugs and alcohol and things like that. But there are mental addictions. There's so many people who are just mentally addicted to negativity and to pessimism and things like that because of how they were raised or how they grew up or just whatever happened in their life. And so we wanted to bring that up because when you have these four pillars and you know that it's spiritual, mental, physical, emotional, all these different things that you got to look at, because sometimes we have different addictions for each of those, different coping mechanisms for each of those. And we just want to shed light on that because it doesn't get talked about enough.
absolutely.
And if you need help, if you like us, jasonbkendrick.com, kirkmsamuels.com, madmenradio.com, go to YouTube, like and subscribe, and make sure whatever it is, you ask for some support and get some help and become a better man, because that's all we want you to be. We want you to be a better, a happier, more successful man. And we're here to support you, and we hope you'll make that change. But until next time, Mad Men
Out.
out.